Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. It is now officially noon. We're going to start up here in just a second, and we've got some in the hallway who are still coming in, and I know some others who are going to be making their way here today, but it is great to have you. We have one of our favorite Lunch and Learn speakers speaking today. He has spoken at more Lunch and Learns. He has the record. This is like in the Guinness Book of World Records. Yes, you have the record for speaking the most times at a Wooddale Lunch and Learn event. And there's a reason we bring Todd back, because he is so practical and so good. And so just want to kind of give you a preview of what's happening the rest of this month. We've got some great speakers for the next 3 weeks. We have counselors who are going to be speaking with us. And so next week, Elizabeth Emmerich is with us. She is a new speaker here. She has spoken to some of the moms groups at Wooddale, and she's just a phenomenal communicator. And she's going to be talking about big feelings, bigger solutions. How do you parent through childhood anxiety? And if you were here last week, I talked about one of the top-selling books right now in America is The Anxious Generation. And that is a great word to describe this generation. So how do we help parent through those times? And so I think you're going to love Elizabeth. And then Tiffany Bobendreyer is going to be with us, and she's going to be talking about how do you use your past. And so think like we all have trauma in our lives that we go through at different stages of life. How do you use that trauma to empower your future? And she is a phenomenal kind of trauma counselor here in the Twin Cities and helps with that. And then we're going to really change the page in the month of April. And so on April 10th, we have a film producer from Hollywood who's going to be with us. Brian Bird has been involved in a huge number of Hollywood productions. He is the creator and executive producer of the longest running show on the Hallmark Channel, a show called When Calls the Heart. And he will be with us on April 3rd. And he's going to be talking about, just as a Hollywood insider, how do you tell redemptive stories and just kind of how do you live in that space. And the next week we have another content creator who's going to be with us on April 10th. Very different than Hollywood. He produces the #1 sports card show on the internet, a show called Chasing Cardboard. And we have him coming on April 10th because it's also the day that the Minnesota Card Show starts. And there will be 100,000 people in the Twin Cities who are coming for that show alone. And he's got an amazing story. He's a former Wycliffe missionary who just uses that show to tell really redemptive stories too. And so kind of a fun start to the month of April. And you've got the rest of the schedule there. But Brian Anderson, who is no stranger to Wooddale Church, our former pastor Leith Anderson's son, is going to be our final speaker in April. And he runs an organization called Hope Kids. And it's an organization for kids who are terminally ill, and a little bit like the Make-A-Wish Foundation that creates these incredible opportunities for kids and their parents locally, though, to just experience some joy in the midst of a really, really hard life. And so he's going to tell the story of Hope Kids, and it's really inspiring. Hope that you'll be with us that last week in April. Well, Todd is our speaker today, and for those of you who Todd is a new name to you, Todd runs the Mulliken Counseling Center in Edina. He is married to Laura, and they've got some wonderful daughters and sons-in-law, and an incredible life. Huge hockey fan, and so if you love hockey and you love University of Minnesota Golden Gopher hockey, you can talk with Todd about that. Todd's been a frequent guest on radio shows and podcasts. He's a contributor to Life Support Resources. We just a few weeks ago had Steve Johnson with us, who runs that ministry, and Todd's part of their board and has just done an amazing, amazing job helping to tell stories and redemptive stories from a mental health angle. He's written a number of he calls them booklets, I'll call them books, that are helpful, including 5 ways to bring out the best in your kids. And that's what we're going to have him talk about today. So would you welcome Todd Mulliken?
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. Brian's so great, isn't he? Yeah, sweet. So it's great to be here. Thanks for coming in today for an hour with the weather we have. How good is that, huh? Feels really good, really good. About 15 years ago now, I started to see some themes with adolescents I was seeing that parents were kind of struggling in these basic areas. And at that point, my kids were adolescents too, so I was kind of keen to go, what is going on? What are you noticing? And so the book I put together back then was just, what do the kids need from the parents in order for the kids' best to come out? As parents, we're the leaders in the home, we're the authority in the home. But what can we learn from our children, from our adolescents, from our young adult or adult children? What can we learn so we continue to be really good leaders in the home? Regardless of the age of our kids or grandkids, wherever we're at in our story. And I found 5 basic themes that they were coming up with. So I thought I'd go over them with you, answer questions, learn from each other, and see where we go. Sound good? So they all begin with the letter C, because the editor of my booklet said they all have to begin with the same letter. So the first is called being congruent. Now, the adolescents in my office weren't saying, hey, I need my parent to be more congruent, right? But what congruent means really is, are you and I, as parents, living our life the way we want our kids to live their life? Usually what I tell parents, it's much more about show versus tell. The kids probably won't listen to us a bunch, but they'll eventually imitate us. So by being congruent, what that means is, it gets a little bit in the minutia sometimes, but sometimes the battles I'm working with in my office are like, I just need my kid to help out around the house. I need them to make their bed. I need them to do the chores. And so I just ask the parent, well, is your bed made, right? So making sure we live, because what I noticed in my work with adolescents is that it was hard for them to respect their parent if their parent wasn't doing what they were asking them to do. Does that make sense? It's just natural to feel like that. So either the kid was having to over-comply out of fear, or they would sneak out the back door or just disrespect the parent. So the good news about parenting, in my opinion, is that if you're in a season of being a parent, we just get to live our life the way we want our kids or grandkids or adult children to live their lives. Really, that's the freedom we have in Christ, in my opinion, is just to live our life the way we want them to live their life. And do that to the best that we know how, because it is much more about show versus tell. I remember a long time ago in my field, I worked with somebody, and I was under this person's authority, and they were saying, at one point he said to me, I was saying, hey, your notes are a little different than I wanted them to be. And he said, well, don't worry about it. Just do as I say, not as I do. And I said, oh, that didn't land well. But it made me look at my own life and saying, for me as a leader, am I really leading out, either with my kids or with other people that I'm leading? Am I really living my life the way I want them to live their life, right? So the good news here is that congruency matters, and that how we live our life is generally how our kids will eventually live their lives, usually the way God works with generational patterns. So that's the freedom we have. But sometimes it's challenging, right? Sometimes we see things in our kids that are really our own stuff, and it gets tricky. We don't realize it. And I remember for me, one of my dilemmas was, in my upbringing, was unintentionally, I would get shut down under stress. And so I would just be alone in that shutdown. And my parents had their own stories, and they were amazing people who did the best they could, loved God, great parents. But it was just a spot that they struggled with. So I noticed with one of my kids, when I would start to feel like they were shutting me out, I really got dysregulated. Makes sense? I started to act in a way that wasn't consistent or congruent with how I wanted them to live. And it was really my own blind spot that prevented me from I needed to figure that out first versus taking it out on my kid. And that generational pattern continued until I kind of took a step back and realized that I was, out of my own fear, my own dysregulation, was putting that on my child versus what can I learn about myself there, so I'm honest with my kid versus putting something on my kid. So being congruent is just a big deal, and our kids, no matter their age, they really will respect us more, I think, if we live in a way that we want them to live. Should I go through all 5 and then do Q&A? You okay with that? Okay. Second one would be consistent. So in most homes, we have a situation where one parent's a driver and one parent's a passenger. Now, once in a while, you have a home where both parents are drivers and they both want to be right, and it's very interesting. It keeps me in business, but it's they both want to be right, and so, even the Father and the Son and the Spirit. So that's kind of like interesting, right? And that can have its own passion and its own amazing things, but also a deep challenge. Both really good with truth, but not very good with grace. And once in a while, you might have two parents that are both passengers, but they never come in for counseling because they can't make a decision. Like, hey, honey, what do you want to do today? Hey, really doesn't matter what I want to do. What do you want to do? No, honestly, I want you to guide this. I don't really care. What do you, it's just this passivity that's just deferring and nothing happens. So what I'm trying to say long-windedly here is in most homes, you have a little bit of the truth and a little bit of the grace going on in terms of parenting styles. It's not always that way, but it's usually what we see. And that's not all bad news, but the key there is, in terms of consistency, how do I first know my own style? Right? Because one of the things that my wife and I, both being firstborns, are very good at doing is giving each other an idea of how they can become a better person. Right? And it doesn't usually work out real well, but we're good at sharing how the other person can do better at their jobs, right, as a parent. And so instead of doing that, what we're trying to do more of now is look in our own mirror and what can I be doing different? Make sense? So what are we doing to understand our own tendencies? So in the spirit of being consistent, maybe ask yourself, in general, would you say, are you more of a driver with your children, where you tend to be decisive? Under stress, you tend to be more of a fighter, where you want to engage, you want to figure it out. At your best, you're decisive, you make the tough call with kids or adult kids. At your worst, you just want to be right, and you won't take no for an answer. Or are you more of that grace-first person, right? That pleaser that just wants to be liked at your worst. At your best, you want harmony. You want all the grace parts, right? You want harmony. You want things to go well. You want to resolve conflicts. Avoid them if you have to, but eventually have some kind of resolve so things can be okay. And there's strengths and weaknesses with that side too. The strengths are, again, that desire for unity and that desire for resolution. And reconciliation is a beautiful desire. The downside of being that flighter under stress is usually avoiding messes. And for you and I that are avoiders, when we avoid the mess, we carry the mess. And our bodies feel the mess. And our body keeps the score, as a recent book has told us. So in the spirit of trying to develop a consistent parenting model, I think the keys are really, like, does the truth teller know when to back off and give the kid their voice a little bit? Does the truth teller able to regulate their own engine and not have to be right, but lead with authoritative language, but also draw out the child based on the age? Create curiosity versus an interrogation would be the gift for the fighter, the driver to do better at. In the spirit of consistency for the pleaser, though, it would be much more about, like, how do you make the tough call? How do you follow through when we need to follow through? Knowing that my job as a parent is not to be the kid's buddy, but rather to be a healthy authority figure. And so sometimes we got to make the tough calls. And that's hard to do. I remember one time when all of our girls were younger, and I was watching them on my day off, and we were going to have to do their chores first, and then we go to the club together. Yay. And one of our kids didn't want to do their chores, and I said, well, and this is the first time I've said no, I think, and it had been the first time I'd said no in probably 3 years. They're all daughters, so I just said, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, and they usually would ask me questions when I was watching SportsCenter late at night, and, hey, can I go? Yeah, I love you. I trust you. You're amazing. My wife is going, what are you doing, you idiot? So I remember being firm and saying, no, this is what we decided. And I'm glad the windows were closed because I think somebody would have called social services. I mean, oh my gosh, he just got really angry. And I was going, what? I just said no. I just said no. But that was really on me because I never said no. Because I think parents say no too often. No first, no first, no first. But I said yes too often. So the dilemma for the pleaser, I think, is we want to always say yes. We want to avoid conflict. We don't want to stir up things because for the flighter, conflict is stressful. Conflict means bad things. We can even spiritualize it and say, hey, if there's conflict, God isn't a part of it. Versus like, take a look at the Gospels. It's full of conflicts. It's okay. God is with us in the conflict. So consistency really matters for our kids. The other thing I would offer is this idea, this visual that I call anger mountain. And ideally, we don't want to make any decisions when you and I are at the top of anger mountain. So how long do you think it takes the fighter to get to the top of anger mountain? Turbo speed, like whoop. Now, typically speaking, the fighter gets back down pretty quick too, like boom, boom. Now, I'm sorry I ran you over with a truck while I was up there emotionally, but I love you, you're amazing. I just kind of lost it, but are you okay? Yeah, we're good, great, let's move on, right? So the fighter's like, boom, typically, right? Dysregulate and then, okay, whew. And that has its own issues, right? So the fighter has to make sure they don't hurt with their words. The scriptures are clear. Ephesians 4, 25, 26, I think says, in your anger, do not sin. Now, I would offer like the fighter sins in their anger by what they say when they're angry. And the flighter sins in their anger by what they hold against. And so, by what they hold against the other, right? They build a case against the other. They don't communicate what they're actually feeling, but they have this internal resentment bank. So how long does it take the flighter to get to the top of anger mountain? A long time. But when they're up there, hey, I like this. I might stay up here for a generation or so. So that's the dilemma for the flighter, right? They have to work on, each day. In fact, let's do this little thing. Okay, so because we got a little bit of time. So, what's one thing the fighter can do under stress to be a better parent? And let me just count it out in my head here. Sorry? It's going to be one word. And so toss out a letter for me. Just, huh? No, one letter. Sorry. Sorry, one letter. So it's one word, it's 7 letters. Throw out a letter. C? B. No B. Oh, yeah, or whatever you want to call it. I can think of another. Let's call it a different name, but yeah, got it. W. No W. Huh? There's a P. The third letter is P. Huh? There's no R. What's no S? One trait the fighter can do under stress that would be helpful. So the A is the 4th letter. We have to leave by 1 o'clock, by the way. Just kidding. Huh? E is the 1st letter. Empathy. Right. So does that mean the fighter never has empathy? There will be you'll get gifts afterwards. Maybe I'll give you one of my booklets, right? Whatever they call it. Yeah.
I have a gift for it. Yeah.
Okay. So why do you think the fighter needs to work on empathy? Yeah, in that moment, doesn't mean they lack empathy all the time, but in that moment, they lack perspective taking, right? Because the dysregulation is louder than the capacity for perspective taking. So it's just something in their own devotional time they can visualize and pray through, because it's a game changer in the home when the fighter remains strong but has empathy for the other. It's a game changer. I'm out of business. Okay? And it's a beautiful thing that the fighter gets to lean into and try to understand. Because oftentimes they didn't have a chance to have their own voice growing up. Now they want to win every fight. Now it's their turn to win. So that's one thing. Now, how about for the flighter, the pleaser, the avoider? What's one thing they can do for the rest of their life that will just change their life forever? And this letter, well, this only has 6 letters, so it won't take as long. I'm sorry, there's a fan going on up here. There's an E. The 4th letter is E. There's no G. S? Yes, there is a S. S is the 5th letter. T is the last letter. So what do we got so far? Ooh, blank, 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 EST. One thing to get to be for the rest of their life. No R? There's an H, first letter H. What do you got? Honest. Okay, how'd you come up with that? What were you thinking? I gotcha. It's noon on a Thursday. Just relax. We got this. So here's the dilemma for the flighter, is they usually are saying, well, if I say this, then my spouse will do that. Or if I say it this way, my kid will. They're just not honest about how they feel. And when they're honest about how they feel, it changes the home. Because they usually don't have much of a voice. The kids unintentionally run them over with a truck emotionally, and they don't assert their own feels, their own needs. Remember, we talked when I led a class here on behaviors, and we have passive behavior, which defers the right to the other. Aggressive behavior violates the right of the other. In Minnesota, we have our main one, which is passive-aggressive behavior, and that is a passive way of being aggressive. So our gold standard as Christ followers is being assertive, where we assert the right. We're direct, we're honest, we're empathetic. We create a volley, not an interrogation. We don't avoid the mess, we address the mess. So the flighters under stress really have a hard time coming up with a thought or a feel because they're too defined by how it's going to go. Does that make sense? If it goes bad, it means I did it wrong. They may even spiritualize and say I'm out of God's favor or something because it didn't go well. Versus like, it may not go well, but honesty today prevents problems tomorrow. So that's the beauty, that's the gift that each style gets to add to their story in order to produce consistency. The third C is being a compassionate parent. And compassionate, the tip here and we've kind of talked about this already a little bit, the tip for the driver parent that will help them be more compassionate, and you might fire me after I say this, is give the kid the last word. So it doesn't mean you lose authority, you're still making the decision, but you're creating a chance for the kid, age appropriately, to have their own feels, to try to find something there. And they may not want to talk about it at the time, so put a pin in it and come back to it. But the idea there is, I'm going to be because I'm the driver parent, I'm usually the one that wants to get the last word after the kid has even opened up. Yeah, we're happy for you, but here's the deal, right? So versus like, hey, thanks for letting me in. I appreciate what you're saying. The consequence is still going to happen, or the decision your father and I, your mother and I have made is still going to happen. But, what you said really matters, and taking that into account, I hear you. So the point there is it's really a game changer when the driver parent increases compassion by giving the kid a chance to have their feels or their thoughts. Likewise, in a different way, the compassionate piece for the passenger parent is to actually make the tough call, right? Is actually step up and be authoritative more. Is be the leader making the tough call, be the person that has to do the hard thing. And that really builds compassion, actually. It actually helps the kid know that you are going to bring the other side to the story. I think this is a good time to talk a little bit about blended families, because the University of Chicago did a really large research project, and it basically said that about half of kids live with either their biological or adoptive parents, both of them. So it just means that about half the children live in blended systems, right, where the parents in their second marriage, or there is a person that's in a first marriage with somebody that's been in a second. And so the kids are blended. We either have one where it's I'm bringing mine in only, there's an ours that we create, or there's the both, right? Each person brings in children to this next setting, blended families, right? Very common in our world. What research is saying is the biggest determinant of that parenting system being effective is for the step-parent to really know their role. And it's really a hard role. Probably one of the hardest roles in the world, really. Because here's what usually happens, is the step-parent is usually harder on their spouse's kids than the spouse is on their own biological kids. Does that make sense? The step-parent is usually harder on the other kids than their spouse is on their own kids. And that is a problem. It's hard for the step-parent because oftentimes their spouse is dealing with some struggles around the divorce and maybe wants to be really a passive parent more, or is just dealing with stuff. But the key there, because you might bump into blendeds a lot, or you might be a part of a blended yourself, and it's really common in our world. So how do we, as a step-parent, if we're in that role, really our primary role is to walk alongside our spouse in their story with their children. And not to give them a list every day of the 433 things wrong with their kids. I just been praying over that, and here's 20 more things for your kids to work on. But rather like, listen first. James 1:19, quick to listen, quick to understand, slow to wrath, slow to speak. Doesn't mean we don't bring up issues, but it means we major on just trying to create a system where our spouse is sharing, like, this is really hard, and go, I hear you, what are your thoughts? Or, trying to create a place where that spouse can really figure out how they want to parent more effectively. So the step-parenting role is a huge role, really hard. If you're a step-parent yourself, I just want to walk alongside you and validate how hard that is. Or if you know a step-parent, just how can I walk alongside them and encourage them amidst the hard? Because it's a very tough role. The fourth C is being a parent that's creative. This is really interesting one, because what I was hearing from a lot of the people I was interviewing for the book was that a lot of times they felt like the parent was trying to make them into a mini me, if that makes sense, versus like, how do I look at each of our kids uniquely? So for me, as a blazing extrovert who loves unfamiliar, who loves connecting, who loves to get going in the morning and loves to do 200 things, one of my children is much more quiet and internal, reflective, introspective, one or two close friends. And so I thought there was something really wrong. So I remember in 8th grade going, honey, are you okay? He's going, I'm good, Dad, what's up? And, well, how was your day? Well, she was in a play, and she was playing a part of Lucy in The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. And so I just started counseling her like an idiot, like, oh, well, who came up to you and talked to you after the play? And she starts rolling her eyes, like, I didn't even see it, right? But I was just like, well, and who are you going to have over this weekend? Or, are you sure you don't do more? Or, oh my gosh, stop, right? So I was I was not seeing her as God created her. Does that make sense? I was seeing her through my own eyes of being extroverted versus celebrating the beauty of her introversion, right? Her introspection, her reflection, her capacities. In the same way, my wife would do the same thing as a strong introvert with one of our kids who was more extrovert, would do 200 things on a weekend. My wife would be exhausted going, what are you doing? Calm down, right? So that's one thing we've noticed a lot is that idea of how am I doing, how are we all doing knowing the uniqueness of how God has created each kid with their strengths, their personality, their dispositions, how they operate under stress. Am I creative enough to see them uniquely, and can we get out of our own way and make sure we're not trying to make them into ourselves? Because kids really feel that. They really feel that. I'm sure you all have stories of that, probably. One that comes to my mind is our oldest was a cheerleader, and I had a letter jacket. Okay, back in 100 years ago, you had a letter jacket. If you got a letter for a sport, you had a letter jacket, and it was really cool. So I was going to her after she had lettered in a sport and was also a cheerleader. You get your letter jacket, right? She goes, no, I don't think so, Dad. Well, you got to have a letter jacket. And then the eye roll came and she says, yeah, okay, Dad. Yeah, no, you'll love it, I promise. You'll love it, And she wore it once in 4 years, But it was more me putting myself on her, right? This is what you need to do because I know you'll love it versus what's her unique story. So being a creative parent means we're really giving space for their own individuality in Christ to become the person they want to be. I was hearing that a lot from the people I was interviewing. And the last one was probably the most powerful one for me, and that is, because I see it in my office with couples a lot, and believe it or not, and that is the last C is being a parent that confesses when we're wrong. It doesn't mean we're saying, I'm sorry every 5 minutes out of a passivity, out of maybe an OCD thing of like being afraid of pathological doubt or something, like I'm always doing something wrong, and I'm sorry, but more of like, that's on me. Like, I came out too hot, or I shut you out. That's on me, and I'm sorry. And when the parent does that, they don't diminish authority, they increase the respect of their kids, and wait for it. More importantly, the kid then, 25 years later, learns how to acknowledge their part in a healthy romantic relationship or marriage they're in, right? They learn the art of confession. They learn the art of owning their own side of the street versus always being right. And I remember like it was yesterday, my wife and I were youth leaders at a church we were at a long time ago, and we had a bunch of pastors in, and they were doing we were just doing a questionnaire of the pastors, like, hey, what's your theology of this? Or what do you think of these issues in our world today? So these high schoolers were kind of just talking to the panel of pastors about a variety of life issues. And one of the questions was, hey, what have you learned most as a parent? And one of the pastors talked about that. One of the pastors said, hey, I never saw my dad say he was wrong ever with me, and so I've been doing that to my kids, and I'm realizing that's not healthy. And that pastor was actually at a much different place theologically than some of the other pastors, and in a place that probably wasn't resonating with the students as much. But that's the pastor they respected the most, because they all could resonate with the fact that typically the parent would expect them to say they're sorry versus the parent modeling confession themselves first. And that's the biggest C for me of all those 5, but I think they all can play an important part. So maybe be asking yourself, which of those 5 C's makes the most sense for you? Which of these 5 do you feel like kind of got it going? I'm feeling good about that area. Which of these 5 feel like a struggle? Yeah, so that's what I got for today. Love to answer questions or comments. And Brian, you're going to be floating around a little bit?
Yeah, floating around. We've got the microphone. People are watching online, so please speak in the mic. Here we go. Megan, question number 1. I love it.
I don't know if I want it online. Is there such thing as a backseat driver?
Oh, tell me more. Do tell. It sounds like a booklet you need to write, Megan.
Just like when you're in the car and you think you're doing great, and then all of a sudden that person's in your ear going, "Oh, red light," or "Oh, the car in front of you stopping."
Yeah.
What if your spouse is most of the time pretty chill, and then every once in a while just like joins you on Inger Mountain, and then all of a sudden like reneges on the discipline you guys came up with, and so they're the like. I don't know. Like
Yeah.
sometimes they're up there with you, and sometimes they're in the back seat going, "No, we're good. You take care of it. You got it."
Yeah, well, that just sounds like the Minnesota passive aggressive, right? Like, no, and that's a great point, right? How do we address that? Thanks for that question. I would usually say, in a perfect world, if we have a spouse that's more that, is passive and then kind of whoop comes out like that, and that's really common, I think. That's probably something I need to add to that consistent thing. Maybe there's a third kind of parent, right? I love that. Yeah, and I would just say, like, the best news to be there with the passive-aggressive person is first just, I would say, vulnerability, validation, and a volley. So if I'm the person who is, if my spouse said that to me or did the backseat driver thing, I would, not like a therapist, but I'd just say, hey, when you threw that out, that was really hard for me. I felt like it landed in a way that was hurtful, and I'm just really struggling with what happened. And maybe you can tell me what your thoughts were. So you volley it over. You're vulnerable. You're not like attacking. You're vulnerable. You're not like avoiding. You're vulnerable. And then you would ask him or her, where are you at with that, or what do you see? And ideally, they would say, well, I just saw you doing the wrong thing. I didn't want to say anything. I never want to say anything. But okay, well, guess what they get to be now? They just get to be more honest. So we get to have more honest conversations up front. And so So I would offer, if I have a spouse that's like that I would just be increasing honest conversations and see how that goes. Because we would need that person to learn how to, have mutual agreements with me ahead of time versus kind of throw stuff out like that. Because when the person does that, it actually makes the kids kind of go, what's going on here? Which doesn't mean, I think it's okay for parents to disagree. I don't think it's good to say, hey, kids, your mom and I are having a fight, come on over, But it's also not great to go like, well, I don't want to see my kids have any kind of fighting. They need, it's okay for them to see disagreements because they're going to learn how to manage that. But yeah, thanks for that. Hope that helps. Just to like be vulnerable, address the mess with that person, reframe how we can get on the same page, agree to disagree, but I want to hear it up front, not from the back seat. I love that, backseat driver.
And which parent should do driver's ed with the kids? If they're
Right.
All right.
That's pretty clear. That's good.
Yeah, next question. Who's got one? All right.
Sorry, I'm finishing my lunch and asking a question. I'm just curious. I have a child who has combined ADHD. I mean, it's more on the severe. It's not the low end, the mild. So I'm just curious, are there ways that you feel, I'm a driver, okay? So I think that's more challenging with a child because they're a driver, big time.
Yeah, the
And
impulsivity
so
comes out.
can you speak into how do you modify or like how do you even lean more into, because I mean, I do have the empathy at times. I mean, I'm reading about it, trying to understand it, trying to be educated and understand, but you still have to hold them accountable, but
Right.
you feel like, I feel like I am constantly managing them all day long, and they don't like how that feels, and I don't like how that feels either. But at the same time, you're trying to help them develop to be an independent adult someday.
Wow, that's so
Right?
good. And how old is the person?
He's turning 11 today. So,
yeah. Happy birthday.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
Yeah.
do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so the combined ADHD, there's three kinds of ADHD. One is the impulsive hyperactive type. The other is the inattentive distractible type. And combined is somebody that can have both. And oftentimes at that age, there is kind of the evolution of both. Usually they start out with impulsive hyperactive, and then inattentive distractible joins it, and then eventually, typically, the hyperactive one gets a little quieter in adult life. And unless it's not treated, then they both stay, and then it's like, ooh, really tricky. So, we just want to see, as a parent, we want to see it, not wear it. So we see their stuff, we see their struggles, we see their sensory sensitivities, we see the impulsivity, fire, ready, aim. We see like start here, go over here. We see we see PDF for ADHD now, which is procrastination, distractibility, and forgetfulness. Welcome, all three of those things. So we see that in the person. We see their struggle. We see it like we would any other type of disability that's physical. It's absolutely no different. Emotions and physical differences, there's no differences. It's all brain chemistry and genetics and stress. So we see that. We see the struggle. So to your great question, and it kind of depends on the kid, is how do I walk alongside that kid and not make all the decisions for the child, also not just, hey, that's just their stuff, and so whatever, right? So I think it's the truth and grace both and, right? And it's also, as the kid gets older, just not like vulnerability in a way that's like, cutting a vein open with them every second, but just like, hey, I would say once a year, how am I doing as your mom? I'm just doing what I know how to do. I love you, and here's what I think is going well. What do you think? You're not doing it every 5 minutes, but maybe occasionally you're asking that. So I think in the spirit of see it, don't wear it, you're not impacted by the things they struggle with because you know that to be true about their condition. They're doing their own strategies if they're in counseling, or if they're in medicine, they're choosing that. So they're getting accommodations in the school, perhaps. So all those things are happening. I see all of that. So I'm going to major on walking alongside versus over-parenting or avoiding, right? And that'll look different for each kid. So like what's loudest for him? If it's the impulsivity, then I know like he's fire, ready, aim, and hopefully that'll get a little bit better. So I'm just making sure I don't join him in the fire, ready, aim. I let the fire come at me, and then I just share how that landed, and we eventually come back to it and try to do a reframe. I call it a little redo with the kid. Doesn't mean you're doing 10 of them a week, but on a big one that feels really yucky, where both of you just feel like it was horrible, we come back and we try it again. And we say, here's what I was feeling. Again, 11 is different than 18, it's different than 5, so age appropriately. As that kiddo is going through puberty and all the hormonal changes, we're just sensitive, like it's going to be a little bit before they actually understand how to follow through, right? So I think you're just knowing yourself. So it's great that you know the condition, and you see the condition. You walk alongside the condition, and you're balancing that, not coddling, but also not overcorrecting. And then 12 to 18, the good news is most of the structures that will develop that person's story is their peer structures, their peer identity, and how am I getting that person into lanes of their strengths? Because here's the thing, with any mental health condition, the key piece is reducing stress. So as the stress is quieter in their story, then the mental health things are quieter. Just like if somebody has a difficult left knee, if I keep running on that left knee and not getting it treated, it's going to hurt, it's going to bark. So if that child is under a lot of duress, then their conditional symptoms will just get louder and more difficult. So I'm trying to, not out of a place of codependency, but out of I just get to try to provide a less stressful environment that has, because with ADHD, the other thing I'll stop talking here is like we want rhythms and routines and rest, not in an overly structured way, but with ADHD, it's just hard to land the plane. They start and woo. They start and whoo, I have a hard time finishing. So ideally, we're kind of in a gentle way finding their strengths, their hobbies, their passions, their interests, and we're creating some rhythms and routines that help the brain learn how to start and finish. And then you'll probably hear less barking at that point. Thanks for the great question. I hope that helps a little bit.
Awesome. Who else has a question? Yeah, come on.
Do you have recommendations on how to stay consistent when you have kids that require different parenting styles? So my daughter, type A, if there's an issue or something, to just cut to the chase. What is it? My son, feely, social, all the things. And if I parent one way, the other says, that's not fair. They get to do this or that. So trying to stay consistent in your style, but your kids just require such different things.
Yeah, it's really good. I have no idea. I'm just kidding. No, no. Yeah, it's that 50-yard line of there's the same rules for everybody, but I'm trying to meet you where you're at, hon. And you don't have to defend yourself to the other kid that's barking about it, because usually it's their own stuff. They had a bad day at school. They come home, and usually if your kids are really angry with you, more often than that means they had a bad day at school. And so you're just kind of like listening and like, hey, tell me more what you're thinking about that. So you always say, listen to understand, don't listen to defend. You don't have to make a case for yourself, right? Just like, oh, tell me more, what are you thinking? And yeah, I'm just doing the best I can. I love you all, and this is what's making sense to me, So you're just kind of validating but not coddling, And most of the time, the emotional state they're in it's just like, whew, they release it, and then if you and I as parents don't like shut them down or defend or like, but just like, oh, it's interesting, tell me more, be a little curious, and I hear you, I'll take that, yeah. I just think you're each wired a little bit different, so trying to have the same rules, but I hear you, thanks for letting me in. It makes sense, just kind of that same motto of doing what I know how to do, love you, open for suggestions, you're amazing, doing what I know how to do. Just kind of a humble but confident response. That's a great question, though, because it's really, because some people would say, no, you just be the same for everybody, and we kind of are, but in those one-on-one times, like what really helps based on their physiology and based on everything else. So otherwise, the kid is doing their own homework about how to navigate around this parent and that parent. And that's not the end of the world, by the way. But also, it can make them a little vulnerable to be codependent about how do I handle this type of relationship and stay in something that's really difficult. So they can kind of wear that. So I love your posture in that.
Great question. All right, somebody else. Yeah, Debbie.
I'm going to piggyback off that a little bit.
Yeah.
So I do, Mark and I do different parenting for our two sons. And we have one son that is just like, fine and dandy, whatever, go for it. What I'm concerned about is I don't want him ever to feel like he can't say, wait, now I don't feel so good about this. Any suggestions? We
Yes.
haven't had an issue.
Right.
But I'm just like wanting to ward off any issues might come.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Well, I just think your heart's in such a great place. So, again, not every 5 minutes, but, pray for a window, a moment. Like, the other day, hon, I was just thinking about this, and my mind's going here. So I was just thinking about that. Is there anything you want to say? Or, I know it sounds weird, honey, I love you, but my mind was going there. So you just let him in versus taking it out on him, which sounds like you would never do anyway. So I always say, especially if they're older kids or young adult kids, like just be vulnerable a little bit and let them into what you're experiencing, and that's as disarming as you can be, and that gives him a chance to not know what to say or maybe think about it for a little bit. Yeah.
All right, somebody else. We've talked a lot about parenting kids who are still living with us, and then we've got a lot of people who have adult kids and grandkids, and so different stage of parenting. What would you say to that parent who's maybe dealing with, I've got some of the mistakes that I made in parenting are showing up now, and it's coming back with my adult kids, and it's just kind of walking through how do I bring out the best in a kid who's a little bit bitter.
Yeah, and just so you know, like the age of reminiscence is usually young 30s. So people are reminiscing more in that late 20s, early 30s. So if your kiddos get to be that age, kind of buckle up, I probably won't be retired by then. I mean, I'm just kidding, but just know, like, hey, tell me more. So stay open to, and usually you find, Brian, like if the kid's in a really tough spot themselves in their 20s, or they're really going through a lot, and they're seeing a therapist, with this generation, just be ready, like, hey, here it comes, And so I want to make sure as a parent, I'm just open-handed, like, well, tell me what you're thinking, or what would you suggest? Well, and unless they come up with some outrageously ridiculous thing, just stay open-handed. Like, tell me more. What would have been more helpful? Or, I'm really sorry for my part in that. Tell me more. And that might still not be enough, because it depends how how much pain they're feeling and what other things are going on in their life. And so it may not all be about how you parented them, but maybe it's just as much about their own pain and their own struggles. But again, we want to see it from a place of compassion and empathy versus wear it from a place of guardedness, defensiveness, needing to be right, and kind of becoming pharisaical about everything. So I think as the kids get to be older and grow up, we get to watch their stories, right, and be open-handed about it. But if they come back with stuff, we just stay open about it. Or, again, not every 5 minutes, but maybe I've learned something about myself, and, got a 27-year-old, and we've got plenty of window time, and in the midst of an hour conversation in the middle, I might say, here's something I've been learning about how I parented, and I think I was off base on this. What was that like for you, or what are your thoughts? Again, we get to have a deep conversation, not every 5 minutes and be overly serious, but we just get to be vulnerable because, the Holy Spirit can do a ton of work when we're vulnerable as leaders.
All right, then maybe a word to, I had breakfast today with a single dad who does not have custody of his kids, and so doesn't have as much time as he used to have, and it's hard for him. What would you say to that single parent who's not living with their children anymore, and how you
Yeah, I hope this doesn't sound dismissive, but I try to tell parents, like, if I got 10 days a month, or I've got 8, or I've got 23, I just get to be present. I get to meet them where they're at. I've got to serve versus scorekeep, and serve doesn't mean coddle, enable. It just means walk alongside, see their story, versus maybe I'm feeling really a lot of injustice and a lot of pain, and I'm maybe overcompensating for that and putting that on the kid. I know I would do that if I was in that situation. I'd be really vulnerable for that. So how am I doing my own gut check first to say, like, hey, I get you this amount of days, and this is your story, so I want your story to continue, and I want to make sure these 8 days, are, so, for example, if I only get 8 days a month, and the kid lives a half an hour away, I want as much of those 8 days to be driving him to his friend's place than it is, no, you're going to stay with me during these 8 days because I only get you for 8 days. We want that kid's life, in my opinion, to be an extension of how their story is, and I get to walk alongside them for that 8 days. And trust me, when that parent creates consistency and all those 5 C's for 8 days, that really matters for that kid's bank account emotionally and spiritually.
Great, thank you. Somebody else? Question? All right, I'm going to give you one more chance, or we're going to tie it up. Awesome. Well, Todd, thank you.
Thank you so much, you guys.
We love having Todd. Let's give him a hand, and thank you. Always practical information. You can go to toddmulliken.com, and all of Todd's booklets are there, and including that booklet, 5 Ways to Bring Out the Best in Your Kids. But so if you want to go just a little bit deeper, you have a spouse who wasn't able to be here. And then just remember, we record these every single week, which is why we come out with the microphone. So if you've got somebody that needs to hear what Todd talked about today, it's just always so powerful. So thanks for being with us. Hope to see you next week. Another Lunch and Learn on parenting. Remember, parenting with in an age of childhood anxiety. So how do you help parents in that age? Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great week.